The Flamingo Hotel, Las Vegas, December 1962, past midnight. The private dining room on the third floor exists in that particular kind of silence that money creates. Heavy curtains, crystal ashtrays catching the amber light of table lamps. The cigarette smoke moves slowly, like it knows not to hurry in the presence of important men. Three figures sit around a mahogany table that's seen more handshake deals than most courtrooms see contracts. These are not men who raise their voices. They don't need to. When they speak, Las Vegas listens. The door opens. Dean Martin walks in, still wearing his tuxedo from the Copa room downstairs. His bow tie hangs loose around his neck. He moves with that particular Dean Martin rhythm, unhurried, unimpressed, like he's walking through his own living room. Dean. The greeting comes from the man at the head of the table. We have a proposition for you. The offer is simple, elegant, generous beyond what most entertainers could imagine. Exclusive Las Vegas residency, protection, partnership, the kind of arrangement that made careers immortal. Dean listens. He nods once, twice, then he straightens his cufflinks, a gesture so casual it barely registers. I'm busy, he says. Not hostile, not defiant, just busy. In that moment, the room didn't realize what had just happened. This is not a story about music, not about Las Vegas, not even about the mob. This is about the only man in Hollywood who could refuse absolute power and walk away untouched. Dean Martin understood something that Frank Sinatra never learned, that Sammy Davis Jr. couldn't afford to learn, and that the most powerful men in Nevada couldn't comprehend. True power isn't what you can take, it's what you can refuse. Tonight, we explore the psychology of indifference, the moral authority of saying no, and why the most dangerous man in any room is the one who genuinely doesn't care if he loses everything. To understand what Dean Martin did that December night, you need to understand how Las Vegas worked in 1962. Entertainment in Las Vegas wasn't just business, it was diplomacy. Every major performer who wanted to work the Strip entered into an unspoken agreement. You performed when called. You attended the right parties. You showed the right respect. In return, you enjoyed protection, promotion, and profits that made Hollywood salaries look modest. Frank Sinatra understood this perfectly. His relationship with powerful Vegas figures wasn't just professional, it was emotional. Frank needed their approval. He craved their acceptance. When they called, Frank answered. When they suggested, Frank agreed. This wasn't weakness on Frank's part, it was recognition of reality. For Sammy Davis Jr., the arrangement was even more essential. As a black entertainer in 1962 America, Sammy couldn't afford to lose powerful allies. When the suggestion came that he postpone his wedding to avoid bad publicity, Sammy postponed his wedding. When they recommended he stay away from certain clubs, Sammy stayed away. Survival required flexibility. The system worked because it was built on dependency. Every entertainer had something to lose: their career, their reputation, their physical safety. The men who controlled Las Vegas understood leverage better than any Wall Street banker. But leverage only works if the other person cares about what you can take away. This brings us back to that private dining room at the Flamingo, to the moment when Dean Martin said he was busy, to the silence that followed. Because in that silence, the most powerful men in Nevada realized they were dealing with someone completely outside their experience, a man who genuinely didn't care. Dean Martin was born Dino Paul Cricchetti in Steubenville, Ohio in 1917. Steel mill town, immigrant father. Poverty wasn't just his background, it was his education. By age 16, Dean was boxing professionally under the name Kid Crochet, not because he loved boxing, but because he needed money. He worked as a dealer in illegal gambling operations, again, not from any love of crime, but because legal work paid too little. These weren't romantic adventures, they were survival lessons. And the most important lesson Dean learned was this: hardship ends. Fame, money, comfort, these things can disappear overnight. But if you've already survived losing everything, you stop being afraid of loss. When Dean moved to New York, then to Hollywood, then to Vegas, he carried that steel mill pragmatism with him. Other entertainers saw their careers as their identity. Dean saw his career as his current job. The difference is crucial. Frank Sinatra, for all his toughness, had never truly lost everything. His relationship with powerful people was partly professional, partly personal, and partly psychological. Frank needed to feel connected to authority. He needed to feel important to important people. Dean didn't need to feel anything. This wasn't indifference born of privilege. This was indifference born of experience. Dean had already survived real poverty, real violence, real uncertainty. Losing his entertainment career would be disappointing, not devastating. More importantly, Dean understood something about confrontation that his colleagues missed. Fighting power makes you dependent on power. Opposing authority gives authority importance. But ignoring authority, genuinely not caring what authority thinks, that removes you from the game entirely. When Dean said, "I'm busy," that December night, he wasn't being defiant. Defiance suggests you care enough to resist. Dean was being honest. He was genuinely busy, and what they were offering wasn't interesting enough to change his schedule. The silence in that flamingo dining room lasted perhaps 10 seconds. In any other context, 10 seconds would be nothing. But when powerful men are accustomed to immediate compliance, 10 seconds becomes an eternity. According to those who were there, the confusion was visible. Not anger. Anger comes when expectations are challenged. Confusion comes when expectations become irrelevant. One of the men finally spoke. "Dean, I don't think you understand what we're offering." Dean nodded. "I understand, and I appreciate it, but I'm busy." Another pause. Then the question that revealed everything. Busy with what? "Things," Dean said, and smiled that Dean Martin smile. Not dismissive, not mocking, just genuinely amused by the question. What happened next was unprecedented in the history of Las Vegas entertainment politics. Nothing. No threats, no pressure, no retaliation. Because how do you threaten someone who isn't afraid? How do you pressure someone who doesn't want what you're offering? Within a week, the story had reached Frank Sinatra. Frank's reaction was telling. He didn't defend Dean. He didn't criticize the Vegas figures. Instead, Frank distanced himself from Dean, because Frank understood that Dean had just made every other entertainer's position more difficult. If Dean Martin could say no without consequences, why couldn't everyone else? The answer, of course, was that everyone else cared. Everyone else needed. Everyone else was afraid. Dean genuinely wasn't. Independence, even the kind Dean Martin possessed, comes with a price. Not the price most people imagine, not danger or retaliation, but something more subtle and more permanent: isolation. By refusing to join the unofficial power structure of Las Vegas entertainment politics, Dean removed himself from more than just business opportunities. He removed himself from the social ecosystem of his peers. Frank Sinatra's famous Rat Pack wasn't just a group of friends. It was a support network, a professional alliance, a social identity. Dean had been part of that world. After December 1962, he chose to step outside it. This wasn't dramatic. Dean didn't storm out of any rooms or make any announcements. He simply became less available, less interested in group activities, less present at the parties and gatherings that defined Rat Pack's social life. When Frank called, Dean was often busy. When Sammy suggested get-togethers, Dean had other commitments. When the group planned Vegas appearances, Dean had scheduling conflicts. Some biographers have suggested this was the beginning of Dean's withdrawal from public life, but that misses the point. Dean wasn't withdrawing from life, he was choosing his life. The difference between Dean Martin and virtually every major entertainer of his era was simple. Dean's happiness didn't depend on his career's success, his peers' approval, or his public adoration. Dean liked performing, he enjoyed success,
But he didn't need these things to feel valuable or complete. This psychological independence was so rare in Hollywood that it was almost incomprehensible. Most entertainers, regardless of their success, live in constant fear of loss. Loss of relevance, loss of audience, loss of respect. Dean had already survived losing everything in Steubenville. He'd survived. And surviving loss, really surviving it, teaches you that loss isn't the end of your story. It's just another chapter.
Real power is quiet. This is perhaps the most difficult concept for people to understand, especially in an era that confuses noise with strength, aggression with authority. Frank Sinatra wielded enormous influence in Las Vegas and Hollywood. He could make careers and destroy reputations. He commanded respect, fear, and loyalty. But Frank's power depended on other people's reactions. If people stopped caring what Frank thought, Frank's power would disappear. Dean Martin possessed a different kind of power entirely, the power of indifference. You cannot threaten a man who doesn't care if he loses everything. You cannot bribe someone who doesn't want what you're offering. You cannot intimidate someone who isn't afraid of consequences. This doesn't mean Dean was reckless or stupid. He understood consequences perfectly. He simply wasn't controlled by fear of those consequences. Consider the psychology of that December night at the Flamingo. The most powerful men in Nevada were offering Dean Martin more money, more protection, and more prestige than most entertainers could imagine. In their experience, everyone had a price. Everyone wanted something. But Dean didn't want more of anything. He had enough money. He didn't need protection. Who threatens someone who doesn't threaten you? And prestige? Dean's relationship with prestige was complicated. He enjoyed success, but he didn't chase it. He never confused his reputation with his identity. This created an impossible situation for the Vegas power structure. How do you control someone who doesn't want to be controlled? How do you influence someone who isn't seeking influence? The answer is, you can't. And that night, for perhaps the first time in their careers, the most powerful men in Las Vegas entertainment discovered the limits of their power. They had built their authority on understanding what people wanted and controlling access to those things. But Dean Martin didn't want access. He was content with what he already had. This is why Dean could say, "I'm busy," without fear or hostility. He wasn't rejecting their power. He was operating outside their system entirely. Dean Martin continued performing, recording, and appearing on television until the late 1980s. He never spoke publicly about that December night at the Flamingo. When asked about his relationship with Las Vegas power figures, he would smile and say something vague about everyone being professionals. His choice that night didn't make headlines. It didn't change the entertainment industry. It didn't even significantly alter Las Vegas politics. But it revealed something profound about human nature and the psychology of power. Most people spend their lives trying to acquire enough wealth, influence, or status to feel secure. They believe that if they can just accumulate enough, they'll be free from fear, free from want, free from vulnerability. Dean Martin understood that freedom doesn't come from having more. It comes from needing less. He didn't fight the system. He didn't expose it. He didn't try to reform it. He simply refused to belong to it. In a world where everyone was performing, for audiences, for peers, for powerful patrons, Dean Martin's greatest act was choosing not to perform when the performance wasn't on his terms. The men in that Flamingo dining room wielded enormous power over Las Vegas entertainment. They could make or break careers with a phone call. They controlled access to the most profitable venues in America. But they couldn't control a man who was genuinely busy with his own life. And in the end, that taught them something they'd never learned before. There are people you simply cannot touch. Not because they're too powerful, but because they're too free.